Hey everyone, so welcome back. Um, so there's something that I've been thinking about recently that I want to talk about, and it's the idea of how people change over time, right? It's something that I haven't really thought about up until recently, and uh, and it's just that the people that you once knew, the people that you once met, they won't be the same person forever, right? So that's something we have to fundamentally understand that people change over time, right? The person that you knew when you were 17, if you were to meet them now, yeah, they may be alive and you can still meet them, but they won't be the same person. At least most of the time, they won't be the same person. So, if you were, let's say, in love with a girl when you were a teenager, um, and let's say the girl is alive, nothing's happened to her, and then you meet with her, let's say, 8, 10 years later, you have to understand that the girl that you fell in love with, that girl is dead. That girl is dead. People completely change over the years, and especially 10 years. I mean, um, that moment, that time, and that person are lost forever in the abyss of eternity, right? So, like for example, when I moved from my home country to the US, I mean, I had a lot of friends back home, but if I were to go home now and meet with those people, those friends won't be the same friends that I had when I was a teenager. Yeah, they're the same, it's the same body, right? In some sense, it's like the same body, but it's not the same person, right? The people fundamentally change. Like even your cells die and then new ones get born. So like people die and then they become new person. So the people that I knew when I was 17, when I was 16, you can safely say that those people are dead, that they are no longer alive. And once you understand this, once you deeply understand this idea, then you will know how important it is to actually not take people and moments for granted. Right? If you're hanging out with someone, if you're having a good time, um, or if you're good friends with someone, or you're dating somebody else, don't assume that this person is going to be here forever. They won't be. Like even if you keep dating them, the same girl may actually change into someone completely different over the years. This is why like a lot of the marriages, for example, collapse, right? Because you've been together for like what, 5, 10 years. People change. The girl that you met when you were 18 is no longer the same girl when she's 28. I mean, how the hell could she be? It's 10 years, people change. So every time you meet someone, every time at least I meet someone, I always have this idea in the back of my head that this could be the last time I'm meeting this person or I'm meeting this version of the person. Right? Because look, you don't know when is the last time you meet somebody. And even though, let's say, you hang out with someone a lot and then they disappear into, they go and do some side quests in life, and then you meet them after, let's say, 2 years, the person you meet 2 years from now is not the same person that she is right now. In 2 years, she may change completely. And so the version of her that you know now may be dead in 2 years. Even though she is alive, this version of her may be dead. And so you really have to like take every moment for what it is. And don't assume that people are gonna be here, the same person is gonna be here with you forever. Because they won't be. Like even though physically there are people may change. And the version of them that you knew is no longer there. And so that's something that I've been thinking about. How when we are younger, there's a lot of people that I knew when I was younger, and I don't know what the hell happened to those people. I don't keep contact with them. But then I'm sure that if I were to meet them now, they won't be the same person. So these people are all dead. We can safely say that these people are all dead because if I were to meet them now, who knows what kind of monsters they've become, right? So. Yeah. And so whenever I hang out with people now, I always keep in the back of my head, what if this is the last time I'm hanging out with this version of the person, right? So, and that's something that I feel like a lot of people don't really pay attention to, they don't keep in mind, because then they take people for granted, right? Like if you hang out with someone too much, they'll take you for granted, and but this is something that we should always keep in mind. This could be the last time you're hanging out with this version of the person. So no. There is the question of, and it's something that bothers me, there is the question of, well, what if this version of the person that you know now, what if this version actually never existed? You know what I'm saying? Like, what if you projected your own image, so to speak, onto this person, and when you found out that this person actually isn't who you thought they were, then you were like, oh, they changed. What if they actually never changed? What if you fundamentally never saw them for who they were? And this is a huge problem. For example, a lot of times when, let's say, a girl dates a guy, you know, in the initial phase, like the first month or so, there's all these delusions that the girl has about the guy. And then slowly she'll learn more and more about the guy, and then she'll find out that, okay, this guy is actually a loser. He isn't what I thought he was, right? Well, the problem is that you actually never saw him for who he is. If only you took a moment and saw him for who he was, then you would have maybe not had all these delusions in your head. So there is always this difficult task, I think. When you meet somebody, when you're hanging out with somebody, when you're enjoying friendship or love with somebody, romantic love, you should always ask yourself, am I in love with, or am I friends with this person as who she actually is? Or am I projecting myself onto the person, and then I'm in love with the projection and not the other person? Right? So this is something that a lot of times we don't really pay attention to, but it's actually important. It's actually important. And this is something that, for example, Kierkegaard talks about a lot in his book. Here's this book called Works of Love, and this guy is crazy. Kierkegaard is. He was a Danish philosopher. Søren Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher and a theologian. And one of the ideas that he emphasizes so much in this book is the idea that he says erotic and romantic love, so like when you fall in love with somebody, and friendship, he says these are forms of self-love. Now let me explain what he means by this. He's saying this, look, he says, fundamentally, we want to love ourselves. We crave self-love, right? But he says self-love cannot be accomplished entirely by yourself. So like you hear these days online, people are like, oh, love yourself, self-love is important. But what Kierkegaard is saying is that you actually cannot perform self-love entirely by yourself. Or maybe you can, but loving another person actually is a form of self-love. How? Well, look, he says, when you love another person, it's preferential love, right? You don't love just anyone. You love specific people. Like let's say if you're in love with a girl, if you're a guy and you're in love with a girl, you want to love somebody that you find beautiful, you want to love somebody that has such and such qualities. So you see there's preference, and that's what he calls preferential love. And what he's saying is that it's not that you want to love her, no. It's that you love her so that she may love you back. And her loving you back is really what you want, he says. So what he's saying is that you project a certain image of yourself onto the other person. You project a certain image of yourself onto the other person, right? You may ascribe qualities to them that that person may not have. So you project a certain image of yourself, so to speak, onto the other person. and you wish to be loved by that image. That's the point. Because Kierkegaard says, well, look, what if it turns out that she doesn't love you back? Then he says, then you will stop loving her. So your love for her was never unconditional. You never actually only wanted to love her, because if you only want to love her, then you would still love her irrespective of whether she loves you back or not. But what Kierkegaard is saying, no. Loving her isn't or wasn't the point at all. The point was that you projected a certain image of yourself onto her, and you want to be loved by this image. In a sense, you want to be loved by yourself because this image is an image of yourself. That's the sense in which love, preferential love, is a form of self-love. In a sense, you project yourself onto the other person, and then you may wish to be loved by that projection of yourself. And the other person there is like playing sort of the middle role. She's playing the role of a mirror, so to speak, right? It's like an object onto whom you can project, so to speak. So things like friendship and love, these are highly preferential forms of love, right? And what Kierkegaard is saying is that fundamentally, this is a form of self-love. So for example, let me give you a quote here. Look, see what he says. He says, in the beloved and the friend, it of course is not the neighbor who is loved, but the other I, or the first I once again, but more intensely. Even though self-love is reprehensible, it frequently seems as if a person does not have the strength to be alone in his self-love. Thus, it does not really manifest itself until the other I is found, and the one I and the other I in this alliance find the strength for the self-esteem of self-love. Right? And he says, further, the love commandment can say to him, love your neighbor as you love the beloved. But does he not love the beloved as himself, as the commandment that speaks of the neighbor commands? Certainly he does. But the beloved he loves as himself is not the neighbor. The beloved is the other I. Right? So one thing that he's talking about so much here, Kierkegaard, is how, in a sense, you project an image of yourself onto the other person, and then you may wish to be loved by the other person. And this is a danger that we have to avoid, I think. If you're someone like me who is maybe careful about these things, when you meet somebody, a girl or that you're in love with, or a friend that you want to be friends with, right? Always try to see that person for who they are. Don't try to shape them into something that you fall in love with. Don't try to change them. You have no right to change another person. You have no right to tell another person what to do or who to be. Don't try to carve them into a shape that you like so that this version of her may love you back. Don't do that. Always see people for who they are. And if you love them for who they are, then that's good. And if you find out who they actually are and you don't like that, then you should leave these people alone. Don't try to go there and then change them into something that they're not, and then, down the road complain, oh, he isn't what I thought he was. Well, you never even looked at who he was. You always projected an image of yourself onto him. And when it turns out that he actually isn't who you thought he was, and then you start complaining. Well, how about at the beginning you actually put all the delusions aside and see the person for who they are? Why don't you do that? Well, it's easier said than done, right? It's easier said that, just see people for who they are, but it's actually not so easy. Because whenever you interact with people, there is so much projection happening that it's actually very hard to tell who the other person actually is, especially when you're in love. Because when you're in love, there's a lot of unconscious projection happening. So you project all sorts of qualities onto the other person that they may actually not have. So you have to be careful about these things. Right? So the idea that, right, something that I've been thinking about is how you should try to see people for who they are, and every time you hang out with them, imagine that this is the last time you're gonna hang out with this version of the person. This version of the person may be dead 1-2 years from now, right? So, for example, if there's a quote I saw online that said, if there's a tree, it says that you walk by every day, and if one day someone told you that the tree will be cut tomorrow, wouldn't the tree infinitely become beautiful? Right? The tree instantly will become so beautiful. And so just like that, it is with humans. Like if you knew that this is the last time you might meet with this version of a person, then you really will be in the moment. You really will appreciate the moment, and you will be nostalgic about the moment while the moment is happening. That's the kind of person I am. I'm always kind of nostalgic about moments, but especially at the present time. Like the moment could be happening and I'll be nostalgic about it at the same time. Right? So this whole idea that people are gonna stay with you forever, that people are gonna remain the same forever, it's a whole lot of bullshit. That's what it is. It really is. People won't stay the same forever. People may not even stay with you forever, but even if they stay with you for long periods of time, they may no longer be the same person after 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. So you should not take people for granted, right? You should sort of enjoy this version of them while this version lasts, and then if they turn into somebody else, well then you take it from there. So, but you also have to understand that I'm not just saying this idea just to sit here like Socrates and preach wisdom. This idea actually makes your life infinitely beautiful, right? Because people don't change drastically all of a sudden. Change is always gradual. Change is always gradual. So every day, people change just a tiny bit from who they were yesterday. And if you don't see them for 1-2 years, then suddenly the change has accumulated so much, then they suddenly turn into a different person. But change is very gradual and it's very slow. And if you understand what I've been trying to tell you, then this idea makes your life infinitely beautiful. Because you realize that today, when you're hanging out with this girl, or when you're hanging out with this friend, today actually is the last time this version of them exists. Because tomorrow they'll change a tiny bit. Maybe you won't notice it, but they'll change a tiny bit. Day after that they'll change even a tiny bit more, and then 5 months down the road, 2 years down the road, the change has become so much that this actually is a completely new person. But every day that you see people, always keep in mind that this version of them I will only see today. Today this person isn't who they were yesterday, and tomorrow they won't be who they are today. Right? And that gives your life infinite meaning and beauty. Because then you will not take a single moment for granted. Because the idea of taking another person for granted, where does it come from? Let's talk about where does it come from? It comes fundamentally from this false belief that people will always be there for you, or people will always be with you, but that people also won't change. That's where the idea comes from. So that they're always there, so why should I really bother, appreciating them? But if you realize that people change over time, that the girl that you meet today will be a tiny bit different tomorrow, because people change. You have to understand people change. And the day after tomorrow, she'll be a tiny bit different. If you understand this, then you will really appreciate the person that's in front of you. Because this is the last time, today is the last time you're interacting with this version of them. And very soon they may turn into somebody else completely. So this actually makes your life infinitely beautiful. This philosophy makes your life infinitely beautiful. And it's not just some fake philosophy that I'm preaching here. I'm actually not preaching anything. All I'm saying is that people change, and so don't take people for granted. Yeah, they may leave you, yeah, or they may stay. I don't care. But what is true is that people change. And even though she's here with you down the road for 8 years, she is not the same girl you met 8 years ago. And if you think she is, then I don't know. I mean, certain qualities she may retain, but she is not the same person. She is not the same person. So that's something to keep in mind. Don't take people for granted. That's my only message. Because the moment you take people for granted, that's the moment you actually stop living. You stop living in the moment, you think they're always going to be there, and that's bad. It's terrible. So, something to keep in mind.